Okay. Good evening. Um, and as I guess the nature of this title might imply, we are getting a little bit existential because I was actually reminded recently of a conversation I had with a friend. Do we call him a friend? Yeah, maybe. Let's go with friend. Um, whom I don't ever want to see again. So when he inevitably hears this, please don't talk to me again. Regardless, I was reminded of a conversation we had on the nature of numbers. So the existence of numbers and whether a number like 3 or 1 exists outside of human imagination or exists outside of human definition. Let's put it that way. And I would argue yes. And of course, my boy would argue no. Or he wouldn't argue no. He would question why I argue yes, like a proper philosopher. But yeah, I would argue yes, and I maintain that yes, they do, for the simple reason that they are defined in such a way that they need no. They're defined in such a way that it's completely symbol independent. So, for example, that's gonna kill me. So, for example, if I define the number 1 as the ln of e, or for example, the log base 10 of 10, in a case like this, if I were to define it, say for example in ln e, I would get 1 because that is how the equation works. But if we're honest, it doesn't matter how we define ln, it doesn't matter how we define e, as long as those fundamental concepts remain. We can define 1, and therefore we can define everything else, right? And it is, strictly speaking, circular because it has to be, and therefore it doesn't really at all matter whether the number 1 is defined by human or if it simply exists in the ether, because its existence is not dependent on a mere definition. Its existence is dependent only on the existence of its peers, which also have existed. And for any universe that uses the same fundamental constants as our universe does, that remains true regardless of if they have evolved life or not. The number 1 will continue to exist, not as a concept thought of by a human, but as an essential part of a great equation that is of the great descriptive equations that are required to form what are essentially our universes. But that is just a little bit off topic because I wanted to actually use this as an example to talk about human existence and how human existence is essentially the same thing, because a lot of humans, a lot of us, define our existence in such interesting ways that make it I shouldn't have gone there. That make it define us not via sort of our own existence and our own purpose, but rather define us based on someone else's definition, right? Essentially, like what my fuzzy friend claims, it is that the number one would not exist if humans didn't exist, which obviously is wrong. um, so yeah, I thought you would go there. We can come back to this. So essentially, those of us who define ourselves by other people's definitions are inherently then less able to have our own grounding, because we're grounded constantly in symbolism or other people's symbolism and other people's in what we perceive other people perceive as perceive as us as, and that's kind of terrible, right? Because as long as we're perceiving ourselves based on an external view, almost like an out of body experience, as long as that's the case, we're never going to be quite happy with ourselves, and that's kind of sad. That's disappointing, right? Like, it, far be it from me to criticize organized religion or anything. um it is simply the matter of, can we define ourselves as can we define ourselves without the need of other supporting elements? And for a lot of us, that's a very hard no, right? It might it might very well be for good, or for what we perceive to be altruistic, or even just, no, for good or even just altruistic reasons. And yet a definition that is external is a definition that is external. So for example, you know, someone who's proud, who perhaps makes the core of his existence that he is a good father, would obviously lose a whole bunch of his life, or not his life, lose a whole bunch of drive in his life when, or if his children turn out to be bad, or if or when his children who are good leave the home for a better life elsewhere. So when we define ourselves externally like that, it is just, that's when we define ourselves externally like that, it is a bit of a it is quite hard, and it leaves the human condition, it leaves the human at a loss for when suddenly that definition is pulled away. And that's sort of the problem, because we never know when the definition will be pulled away. Oh my god, the engine thinks it can win 82% of the time. Oh, look at that. Anyway, yeah, so if we were to take our analogy back to the definition of the number one, it doesn't matter what you call it. It doesn't matter who calls it what. It simply does not give a fuck, right? The number one doesn't give a it does not care at all. You could call it duck is equal to, I don't know, T, let's see what's around here, T guitar. Duck, it doesn't care. As long as the definitions and the underlying physical concepts remain the same, it is the same thing. It doesn't give a crap. And so I find, as humans, sometimes that's something that we really should do, because it is ouch. Because it is just so much of what we of how our lives work, that we really need to define ourselves in a more, or a less, how do we say, in a less, I'm going to go with the word harmful, in a less harmful way. simply because it is harmful, and it shouldn't be harmful. So yeah, that's I think the most important part, right? Like as a person, you know, some as a person, as a a person who has the oh, what word am I going for? As a person with agency, it is absolutely important, absolutely vital for us to be forward looking, and so defining ourselves through an external means doesn't provide us with that forward looking ability. It simply does not. And so we cannot allow definitions and what we define ourselves as based on what other people think we should define ourselves as. We cannot allow that to how do you say, to interfere with our need to be successful. No, our need to I'm getting distracted by the computer. That move I did not expect. We cannot let our oh fuck, I completely lost my train of thought. Fuck you, Leela Zero. Anyway, we backing up just a little bit. If we want to be successful, or if we want to be at peace with ourselves, forget being successful, forget being, you know, oh wow, better than our peers, blah 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 blah. And on that note, social media is stupid. Anyway, oh, also Happy New Year, by the way. I completely forgot to talk about that. If we want to be at peace with ourselves, the very first thing we have to do is forget how other people define us and how they judge us, because that's just not the right way to go about it. And I absolutely understand that it's exceptionally difficult. That as and here we come back a little bit to human biology, because unfortunately it all comes back to human biology. Oof, that move killed me. Because it always comes back to human biology, because when we were monkeys less than 100,000 years ago, we were really or rather, it was really necessary for us to be social animals. Absolutely, 100%, as social as we could, because only when we worked as a group, and I'm very cognizantly not using the word team, only when we're working as a group can we survive in sort of the harsher places that humanity ended up expanding to, right? And partially that's what pushed human evolution forward, because as we moved, at least from my perspective, as we moved out of Africa into harsher climates, we started having to communicate better, work together better, just so we're able to survive. And so I'm of the opinion that hopefully, oh my god, none of these moves are good. We might have to check what's a decent move. And so yeah, because we've evolved in a way that really emphasizes the need for social interaction, and for our personal group to accept us, it has two consequences. The first is, of course, what I've been railing against, that sort of external definition. But also the second, which is perhaps even more insidious, is that we're unable oftentimes to leave groups behind that are toxic. And the inability to leave toxic relationships behind is one of the greatest tragedies that we really have in this world, because there's nothing more tragic than being stuck in a toxic life that we cannot get out of. Anyway, back to what I was saying before. Because we evolved in a way that really demanded us to work in corporation, it both pushed forward our development and our evolution as humans, but also inserted into our brains this desperate need to belong. And that's why I used, again, earlier, I emphasized that I was not using the word team, because a team is about sort of mutual I mean, okay, now we're arguing semantics, but essentially the point I'm laboriously getting to is that human society oftentimes is not willing cooperation as much as it is the forceful voice of someone who's perceived to be the strongest by the group. And so when we allow others to define us, we are not only defining limiting our own ability to expand and to become shall we say more interesting, so give that up and fight for more territory. Got it. When we allow others to define us, not only are we limiting our own ability to become better rounded people, or become better humans, better for ourselves at least, but we also then allow those the people who are loudest in that particular society to turn us into, to define where we can go and what we can do and how we can do it. And that's more than tragic. That's just like, that's tragedy squared, right? Because not only have you been thrust into a position that as we've talked about before, you can't really, it's exceptionally difficult to get out of, but suddenly now you're also in a position where you're no longer allowed, maybe not allowed, but where it's no longer acceptable for you to chart your own course or to change. And so with no change, remember, I think I did talk about this perhaps even last episode, about how when people when people move, they leave, but if you move a tree, it dies, Chinese proverb and all. But yeah, that's we're way over time. But yeah, so don't let others define you. Definition needs to come from within the heart, within the soul, within. That sounds corny as hell. But there, I know, I'll put it this way. There are scientific and evolutionary reasons why we end up defining ourselves externally, and therefore, and those reasons should, if we understand them, push us to draw more effort in defining ourselves through our own hard work and through our own minor successes, and let those minor successes build up until we can consider it a major success. And I think that's something good to end it on. Please remember, don't use Chrome. It's bloated, it's disgusting, it's really, really bad, and it's a monopoly. Let's not let Google monopolize your life. please download Firefox.